Now let's begin with this landmark news that Canada will officially recognize a Palestinian state in September. The Prime Minister Mark Carney says it will happen at the UN General Assembly, and he laid out the conditions which need to be met.
This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms, including commitments by the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state.
The announcement follows similar commitments from other allies in recent days. Carney says the level of human suffering in Gaza is intolerable and described the situation as rapidly deteriorating. He's also repeating calls for Hamas to release all hostages in Gaza. Evan Dyer has been following the story for us from Ottawa. And Evan, what else did we hear from the Prime Minister?
Well, we heard him there talk about conditions and commitments, and really that's sort of the crux of this announcement. There was some question about whether this would be a recognition more like the unconditional French recognition of Emmanuel Macron, or more like the British recognition where Keir Starmer laid down a number of conditions for the Israeli side, saying to the Israelis, for example, if you halt the fighting in Gaza, stop the land grabbing in the West Bank, allow food to flow into Gaza, then we may not go ahead with this recognition in September. And he was heavily criticized at home for effectively appearing to give Israel a veto over Palestinian statehood. So what we saw instead from Canada was a sort of a third way approach. There are conditions, but the conditions are on the Palestinians, not on the Israelis. And there are also conditions that are very difficult to meet right now. And therefore, Canada is accepting commitments to meet them in the future. They are, as we just heard there, the elections in 2026, reform of governance, and a demilitarized Palestinian state. But Mark Carney was asked, how could the Palestinians, for example, hold elections at the present time or in 2026? Obviously, in Gaza, that's out of the question. And in the West Bank, too, there's a great deal of violence, only overshadowed by what's going on in Gaza, a very tight occupation. In East Jerusalem, how could Palestinian candidates campaign? It's not even legal to display a Palestinian flag in East Jerusalem at the moment. And he did acknowledge those difficulties. Let's watch.
Clearly, that's not a possibility now. It's not a possibility in the near term. And part of this, again, is, let's go back to where we're starting, which is we are working ourselves with others to preserve the possibility of a two-state solution.
So Canada is accepting commitments that these are things that will happen when they can happen. And there's a recognition, too, which Mark Carney spoke about here, that Israel has become an obstacle to the two-state solution, that the people who are essentially foot-dragging on a movement towards two states are people who are within the Israeli government, and that therefore there's no point in maintaining what has essentially become a fiction, which is that we're waiting for the two sides to arrive there through negotiations. Clearly that's been going on for 32 years, and it has not produced a result.
It's only been a few hours, but what's been the reaction so far to the announcement?
We have seen some negative reaction from Israel, which is not surprising. Of course, Israel facing a wave of recognitions, it appears. We had Malta yesterday, for example, in addition to England and France, to Britain and France. Israel doesn't want this to happen. And we spoke recently with Israeli Ambassador Ido Moed right after this announcement, and he pointed at that issue of conditions and commitments and saying that essentially the conditions won't have to be met. Let's listen.
When a country like Canada says, well, but we are going to recognize whoever it is on the Palestinian side as a state, that is fine. But on the ground, it doesn't change a thing. The Abbas's commitments, we've heard them so many times before. Just one question. Why is he there for so many years without elections? Why aren't there any elections there? Because there is no support. Because there is support for Hamas.
So we also heard criticism from the White House with President Trump saying that this recognition are effectively a reward to Hamas, a reward for its massacre on October 7th, which led to the chain of events that led to this recognition. We've heard similar criticism actually coming from the Conservative Party of Canada, but from the Palestinian side, we've heard considerable elation. We spoke with the Palestinian General Delegate, former General Delegate to Canada, Mona Abu Mara, now Palestine's representative in Italy. And of course, she said this has been a long time coming, and while the conditions will be difficult to meet, that the Palestinians will work towards them. They want to see this recognition take place.
Evan, you covered a lot of ground there and did it very nicely. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
All right, let's bring in Tomas Juno for some analysis on this. He's a professor of public and international affairs at the University of Ottawa. And let's begin with the significance of this stance that Canada has taken. What's your view on that?
It is significant in the sense that it's a departure from Canada's traditional position of waiting for a two-state solution to be the outcome of negotiations directly between Israelis and Palestinians. So in that sense, it's significant. It's also significant because we are clearly aligning ourselves with European allies, the French, the British. But it's important not to exaggerate the significance in the sense that this is a bit more than a symbolic move, but it doesn't change the reality that ultimately a two-state solution, a Palestinian state coexisting alongside Israel, will only still be the result of those direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. And that, unfortunately, remains a very distant prospect.
What impact do you think Canada's announcement will have, either as one more country that's made this announcement or as part of the group of countries that have?
Well, that's the important part in the sense that whatever Canada does on its own has little or no impact whatsoever, whether it's recognition of a Palestinian state, whether it's what we saw in recent months, which is the sanctioning of extremist Israeli settlers. When it does make a real but limited difference is when we do it in consultation with allies, with European allies, with Australia and New Zealand. And at some point, if there is to be some serious movement towards a two-state solution, along with, for example, other Arab states in the region, Saudi Arabia and others who also support a two-state solution. So it's that mass effect that at some point, hopefully can have an effect.
Dyer mentioned a moment ago that what Canada has done here is kind of a middle ground. It's somewhere between the French announcement and the British announcement. And so assess what Canada did in terms of its nuances and maybe how it reflects what our government wants as opposed to the French or British.
Well, I have to say that I like the way that it was framed by Canada this afternoon. First of all, there is a clear condemnation of Hamas. There's a clear recognition that there has to be no role for Hamas moving forward in an eventual peace process. There is clear support for Israel in general. But at the same time, there's a recognition that if there is to be serious movement towards a peace process, one of the many conditions, not the only one, but one of the key conditions is a strengthening of the Palestinian Authority. For now, the Palestinian Authority, it's weak, it's corrupt, it's perceived as illegitimate by a large number of Palestinians. So its strengthening, its legitimization in the eyes of Palestinians, but in the eyes of the international community, is a necessary step moving forward. So recognition in that sense supports it. It doesn't support Hamas. That's nonsense. But the conditions that Canada posed in terms of elections, in terms of reforms, in terms of capacity building, to me, are some of the necessary things that have to happen moving forward.
And is there a role for Canada here moving forward?
There's a very limited role for Canada. I mean, there's still a lot of Canadians who hold this romantic vision of Canada as an honest broker, as a mediator. To be blunt, nobody in the region is calling for Canada to be a mediator or an honest broker at this point. If there is to be mediation, it will be the U.S., of course. It will be the UN. It will be regional states like Qatar or Kuwait who've done it over the years, Egypt as well. Where Canada can play a small role, but non-negligible, is along with other allies, is to support the peace camp on both sides, on the Israeli side, but also on the Palestinian side, with, for example, capacity building for the Palestinian Authority. And that's where we have a small but relevant niche role to play.
So maybe the bigger impact of this decision in the eyes of the government was its domestic impact as opposed to international. And let me ask you, did you ever think you would hear a Canadian national government saying that it was going to recognize a Palestinian state?
Well, I'm surprised. I did not honestly expect this to happen as quickly. I thought there was a reasonable chance that it would happen in the fall. I mean, I've been calling on the Canadian government to do this for a while now, so I do agree with the move. There's been a trend among Europeans, Australians, New Zealanders in this direction for a while. There is growing frustration with Israel's approach to the war in Gaza that has also contributed to this. But at the same time, I think we do have to remain, as much as some people are celebrating or criticizing, we need to remain a bit realistic that in the best of cases, the road ahead will be extremely difficult as part of an eventual peace process. We're still very far from that.
Professor Juno, really appreciate your analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tomas Juno is a professor of public and international affairs at the University of Ottawa.